The Tau may have a relatively short history by the standards of most species across the galaxy, but the forces of the greater good have still become renowned, idolized, and feared by those who know of them. Their empire is somewhat of a tyrannical dictatorship, with the ethereal caste having near total dominance over all aspects of life and society. But there exist those individuals who defy the Aun and strike out on their own. The most famous of these individuals to take that step was the Firecaste's greatest commander of the era, a master of Mon'tyr and a student of the legendary Commander Farsight. However, events conspired to lead to his eventual defection, and the forces beneath him founded a new empire of their own, away from the yoke of the Ethereals. The commander still lives today through means unknown to him, and even in the darkness of the Mon'tyr, his forces survive and arguably thrive. He is the author of the Book of the Beast and the Mirror Codex, the creator of the Way of the Short Blade, the hero of Arcanasha and Vior'la. He is Shas'O Vior'la Shovah Case Mon'tyr, sometimes known as Shovah or Commander Farsight. In this log, the 150th of its kind, and what my Gavesa tells me is a special edition for another reason, I wish to tell the tale of the individual I owe my allegiance to, and I hope I can do his story justice whilst maintaining the neutrality these logs typically have. This is Tactica Imperialis, and this is the 25,000 subscriber special, whatever one of those is. Welcome to 40k Stories. The Tau that would later become Shovah was born on the planet of Vior'la, a sept world from the first sphere of expansion with the name of Sho, though I've never heard him called that personally. The use of a name as opposed to title or honorific is exceptionally personal, and I'll only use it here to aid with understanding. He was raised and trained like all members of the Firecaste, a warrior subculture cum subspecies of the Tau, following the teachings of the Code of Fire inside a training dome, in this case the Mon'tyr dome. The Code of Fire isn't something I've had the particular pleasure of reading in detail, it's outside the purview of even a Vash'ya like me, but future Shovah knew it inside and out and had it memorized pretty quickly. He was a prodigy pretty much from the outset, thriving in the simulations of Mon'tyr despite his relatively young age, though I do wager that secretly learning the signals of the mentors probably helped with that. He graduated under the watchful eye of none other than the legendary Commander Farsight, the hero of the second sphere of expansion, who had brought in several new sept worlds and had a mastery of more aspects of Tau warfare than any of his peers or students. This crossing of paths with now Shas'O was fleeting, but it would not be the last time the pair would meet in their lives. For now, it was time for the young fire warrior to experience his first true war zone, as he and the other graduates of Mon'tyr were deployed to the region of space known as the Western Veil. The Tau were embroiled in a war with the Xenos race known as the Araken in what became known as the Veil War, with Vior'lan forces being heavily involved in the fighting and eventual command falling to a Commander Dawnstone. The reputation of Shas'O had not remained confined to Mon'tyr, and many of his tutors and mentors from the training dome kept an eye on their seeming prodigy. In fact, some pulled a few strings to ensure that Shas'O was involved in some of the heaviest fighting in the Veil as a further test, or as a way to get rid of a particularly annoying and arrogant ex-pupil. Either worked for them. Their fears were unfounded though, or confirmed depending on how you look at it, as the Shas'La excelled again, effectively leading his team despite not yet being a Shas'Wi. After 4 years, the standard length of service for a Shas'La under normal circumstances, Sho was recommended by his Shas'Nel, a Karcher Fireblade for those who don't speak Tau, to undertake the trial by fire that would allow him to advance to the rank of Shas'Wi. Presumably this was done back on Vior'la, as many of his old mentors were involved in the design of that particular trial, a simulated live fire exercise against hopeless odds as a way of teaching Sho a lesson. The Shas'La died attempting to save one of his teammates, but awoke from the simulation nonetheless promoted to Shas'Wi. Only those who died had actually received the promotion, and now Shas'Wi Sho was on his way back to the Western Veil. He was assigned to an XV-88 broadside team under the command of Shas'Fra Oblo Tai, who taught him the ways of battlesuit warfare, and as the Veil War drew into its final phase, he was permitted to pilot an XV-8 crisis battlesuit for the first time. Commander Dawnstone led the push against the Arachne that finally broke the Xenos, and Shas'O jumped from Shas'O to Saznami as well as losing most of a leg, all before the Arachne leadership was assassinated. The timescale of the trials by fire indicates that this took something like 4 years from his return, since only a Shas'Vre can become a Saznami, but I can't be sure on dates since the Ethereals probably scrubbed the records. In the aftermath, Dawnstone had plans for her Saznami that would go on to define his future in many ways, as she secretly initiated a trial by fire for Shas'O, a simulation so convincing that he had no idea that it was false. The simulation in question was a boarding operation onto an Arachne ship, which would go horribly wrong, as hordes of tiny skitterlings, creatures capable of burrowing inside a battlesuit and devouring the pilot, attacked the Tau, including Shas'O and Dawnstone. Following his duty as Saznami, Shas'O laid down his own life to save the commander, seemingly even going beyond the call of duty whilst doing so. When he woke up from the simulation he didn't even know he'd been in, Dawnstone spelled it all out. He'd passed his trial by fire and been assigned to the personal tutelage of none other than Commander Farsight himself. This meant travelling to the Sept world of Dalith and to a place known as Mount Kanji, which Farsight had retired to after suffering a career-ending injury. There, he met with 2 other Tau who had been chosen to study directly under Farsight, Case and Shas, both of whom had very contrasting personalities to show and would go on to become masters of their own aspects of war whilst learning of all on Mount Kanji. The trio trained as individuals and as a team, becoming all but bonded together by their experiences whilst embodying different parts of the Code of Fire. The future Shas'O, an impetuous individual, would gravitate toward the route of Mon'tyr, which translates as the killing blow and typically takes the form of a perfectly timed sudden assault. Shas, now known as Shas'O or Commander Shadowsun, would take the path of Cao Yon, the Patient Hunter, whilst Case became a Monat, a one-man army and living weapon. Little is known of the training that took place on Mount Kanji, just the odd test here and there, but Farsight undoubtedly shaped all of his students as best he could, tempering their flaws and honing their skills until the trio were arguably the finest commanders in the Tau Empire of the time. But before now presumably Shas'O or Shas'O Shas'O was released from his training, Farsight spoke to him privately and gave him one final message: do not trust them all. The context of this message is unknown even to this day, but it seems to be something that stuck with the commander for the rest of time. But for now, his training was as complete as it could realistically be, and it was time for the students of Farsight to forge their own paths in the expansion of the Tau Va. The first known deployment of Commander Farsight as a commander was also the one in which he earned the honorific most know him by today. This was the war on the rust desert hellscape known as Arkanasha, a planet whose storms were lethal to even a bearer of the Herexvre and, in the minds of some, had a form of sentience even if the Ethereals said otherwise. The invasion of Arkanasha had been incredibly sudden, with the Orc or Begel War Doc under Warboft's Toothjaw coming from nowhere and all but overrunning the planet even before Shas'O and his Firecast could arrive. There are conflicting reports which suggest that Shas'O was already en route to Arkanasha in order to train its Firecast as opposed to reinforce it. I wasn't there, so I can't strictly be sure. That said, he took to his task of defending Arkanasha quickly, re-establishing the supply routes and analysing what he could of the Orcish behaviour. This would go on to become the Book of the Beast, arguably the definitive tome for the Tau on the Begel mindset and way of war, but for the time being it was merely observations that allowed the forces of Vior'la and Arkanasha to strike at and exploit the Greenskins. Unfortunately, the Orcs do not play by the rules of warfare like many other races do, and the tactics of assassinating the leadership of a given group repeatedly in an exercise known as the Thinning proved to have little effect. These stealth campaigns, combined with the study and exploitation of the Begel language by the Earthcast, led to Shas'O receiving a new moniker, Shovah, or Commander Farsight translated into the Galar tongue, a name that has stuck with him ever since. But despite his success, the realization that the Orcs were still growing in number tanked morale amongst the defenders of Arkanasha, and Shas'O needed a new plan. He took the time to truly pen the Book of the Beast, compiling everything from an incredibly deep study in an attempt to turn the tide. Arguably, none within the Tau Va have ever understood the Be'gel more deeply than Showva, and the knowledge circulated amongst the Firecast served the defenders well. The Orcs were hammered by the resurgent Tau in surgical strikes, brutal ambushes, and coordinated assaults. Despite being heavily outnumbered, the Tau were able to preserve their strength whilst killing around 75% of the Greenskins on world. But even then, all but broken by the standards of a conventional military, the Be'gel would not stay down, and the technologies of the mech boys were able to strike a devastating blow that changed the course of the war irrevocably. Protected by force fields, an Orc force, including a Stomper war machine, attempted to attack the biodomes housing the Tau citizenry at a place known as Ghoul's Gorge. The force fields proved to be tough enough to withstand even the heaviest of firepower, and Showva's forces had no choice but to engage exactly where the Orcs held the overwhelming advantage, up close and personal. It was a massacre, with Farsight eventually being forced to signal to retreat, and even though the war still lay heavily in the Tau's favour, on the cusp of victory in fact, that was enough for the Ethereals. The venerable Aun'Va arrived to inform Showva that the Tau were abandoning Arkanasha entirely, a full evacuation, both civilian and military. Unsurprisingly, the commander was not happy about it, thinking that with a well-placed hunter cadre he could actually win. And others in the Firecast, including Shas'O, rankled too. But this was the time before anyone knew how to say no to the Ethereals, and so they complied. The Firecast then did return and take Arkanasha back without Showva within about a year, perhaps proving Farsight's point, but the commander chose instead to adopt the colours of the planet's warriors, a deep red, for his own XV8 battlesuit. These colours have remained unchanged ever since, and have since propagated to become the official colours for Farsight's command and later armies, but we'll get to that in due time. He also learned another lesson from Arkanasha, something that would horrify almost any other member of the Firecast at the time, and most of them today: the necessity of melee combat or engaging at a range far too few would feel comfortable with. This would go on to become a full-blown military doctrine known as the Way of the Short Blade, a doctrine that does not exactly extol melee combat, but demands training in it to allow for control of situations that are fought up close. An example of this slight tilt toward an acceptance of melee can be seen in Showva's arguably most famous engagement fought entirely under the banner of the Empire, the Damocles Gulf Crusade launched by the Imperium of Man against the Tau. The Watercast had managed to, slowly, infiltrate and flip a handful of Imperial worlds in the Timbra subsector in what are known as the Silken Conquest. But though it took them a while to respond the Galar did, with force. The Gairon Shah of several chapters barged over the subsector in short order and crossed the Damocles Gulf in order to attack the Empire directly. Several fringe worlds were crushed, but the Crusade stalled on the Sept world of Dalith. Both Showva and Shas'O were deployed to the world's defence, and for a time their actions together and apart saw the Imperials massacred at every turn. It was arguably the introduction of Psykers, whose abilities were known as mind science at the time, to wrong-foot the Firecast and bring the war back into balance. Tracking Showva's movements in the war would be a challenge even for someone with all the archive data, as his Mon'tyr strikes were already the stuff of legend by this time. But some very famous names under his command were definitely busy. A protege known as Commander Brightsword slew a captain of the Ultramarines. Shas'O Cardrell, or Commander Bravestorm, utilised the newly developed Onega Gauntlet to destroy several Imperial tanks in melee, and Fi'o Vesa developed the Puretide Engram neurochip received by many, including Shas'O Arkanasha Shavastos. Showva is believed to have nearly died at the hands of the Ultramarines, notably by future captains Numitor and Sicarius, but his presence alone was a huge morale boost, and he was shown huge faith and loyalty by any who served under him. However, eventually Dalith devolved into a war of attrition, and one thing in the Imperium's favour is that it almost never loses one of those. Fortunately for the Tau Va, the Imperium also had what it considered bigger problems to deal with. Notably, the Tyranids, or Yihei, were encroaching on Ultramar. This was around the time of High Fleet Behemoths coming, 745 M41 or so if you're trying to keep track. As a result, negotiations with the Watercast and orders from above caused a full Imperial withdrawal, not just from Delith, but across the Damocles Gulf entirely, though the worlds of the Timbra subsector remained in human hands. Of course, the Watercast made out in their propaganda that the Tau would repulse the Galar through strength and skill, which is of course a load of rubbish, but morale was perhaps further through the floor then than it had even been on Arkanasha. The Ethereals needed something to boost this and try and bring the expansionist Tau Va back on track. The plan was not to rest idle, but rather go back on the offensive, cross the Damocles Gulf, and reclaim the worlds originally taken in the Silken Conquest by force. And for that, the Aunar Toll had just the candidate, Commander Farsight. The inspirational status and proven aptitude of Showva made him the ideal leader for what became known as the Farsight Expedition, and the Ethereals appointed him as the overall High Commander at an Elemental Council. Both Showva and Shisera questioned the choice to appoint Farsight as opposed to Shadowsun. She didn't have the stain of a defeat like Arkanasha on her record, she was a better logistician, and she hadn't dared to outright lie to an Ethereal as Farsight had done following the repulsion of the Imperials, though that one wasn't voiced aloud since the penalty was and probably still is death for doing so. Nonetheless, their objections were overruled by Aun'Va, the future Ethereal Supreme and the Ethereal that Showva had lied to regarding the fate of Shas'O. Farsight had secreted away his friend from Arkanasha and faked his death rather than hand him over for lobotomization, and whilst it's unclear if Aun'Va knew, there was certainly a chance of it. Whatever reasons the Ethereal Council actually had for choosing Showva will likely never be known, though a demonically possessed watercast known as Poor Malkayor shocked the Hall by suggesting it was an attempt to get rid of Farsight as a martyr or a far-flung figurehead. Nevertheless, Showva and his warriors were gathered in what would be the largest fleet of the Tau Va seen to that point, and set out across the Damocles Gulf to reclaim the Timbra subsector. But before he left, the High Commander met with the AI holoprojection of his former mentor Commander Puretide, with the pair forced to speak cryptically due to the constant hovering of Ovesa, yet still able to say much. And following that, he spoke privately with Shisera before her internment into cryostasis per the wishes of the Ethereals. Once those affairs were in order, the Farsight expedition was launched. Almost the entirety of every cast was placed into stasis due to the length of the journey, but Showva and others remained awake throughout, either by the will of the Ethereals or of their own accord. The High Commander spent this time well, studying what he could of the Gayron Shah and their own military doctrines. He'd managed to decipher the Orcs in the Book of the Beast, so why not do the same with the Astartes? This led to the creation of what is known as the Mirror Codex, with a little help from a Gavesa Inquisitor, still Imperial, just undercover at least at the time. The fleets fended off an assault from the Scarlords Astartes during their travel across the Gulf, with Showva piloting a prototype XV-86 Cold Star battlesuit across the void to infiltrate and damage the Gellerfield of a Scarlord's vessel, fending off servitors and a minor group of demons on the way out. He had to be saved from the void after a running battle with what is believed to be a Helldrake demon engine, and whilst he lay unconscious and wounded, the order was given for the Tau to retreat from the Imperials. But when Showva came round and was healed enough to attend an Elemental Council, or at least close enough, he had a much bigger bone to pick than that. Around a third of the entire Farsight expedition had been lost as a result of the attack, with many Tau left behind to die in their stasis pods. The fact that all those not evacuated held the lowest rank of La, effectively wiping out all personnel at that rank from across the four castes, was bad enough for Showva to all but lose his temper at the Ethereals accompanying the expedition. And then they told him that no reinforcements would be crossing the Gulf in their wake. He apologised immediately after, but the memories of Arkanasha and the abandonment associated with the Ethereals' decree boiled over. He shouted at the Ethereals in a public council, openly questioning their judgment in a heretofore unheard of act of defiance. The Ethereals forgave him, but openly told him afterward that he would be exiled permanently from the Empire if he dared speak against them privately or publicly again, and with that, It was back to the task of conquering the Timbra subsector, but now with a much smaller force of elites. Target 1? The capital world, Vior'la, the son of Vior'la, named as such due to its volcanic nature reminding some of the hot-bloodedness of Vior'lans such as Showva. The planet was held at the time by the Adeptus Mechanicus, who were exploiting the planet's resources, both geological and biological, for theirs and the Imperium's gain. But the Mirror Codex was getting more and more complete with every passing rotar. Shas'O Vior'la Mon'tyr was on hand to aid the expedition's forces, and Showva had plans involving all the cast to minimise the challenge posed by the vast Imperial numbers. Being somewhat Vash'ya like that has its perks, let me tell you that. The initial plan was for the Firecast, aided by the Mirror Codex, to counter any Imperial military forces and start an uprising amongst the slaves of the Mechanicus, effectively flipping the numerical advantage of the Imperials in the Tau's favour. The first part of the plan worked perfectly, the second did not, and so the rebellion was instead incited by Mon'tyr, who roused the slaves in a way no other of the Watercast could have tried to do thanks to his demonic possession that, at least for now, remained hidden from the other Tau. And all the while, Ovesa and Fi'o Worldscaper had been developing the experimental devices known as seismic fibrillator nodes, which would trigger the volcanoes and supervolcanoes across Vior'la into eruption once Showva's Mon'tyr was underway or complete. The intervention of a Scar Lord's epistolary nearly scuppered things, with only the psychic intervention of the Inquisitor and Mon'tyr able to hold it back and destroy it. And Oblotai 3-0 was destroyed along with the prototype XV86 to prematurely detonate an Exterminatus warhead that would have destroyed Vior'la. But the day was won, as was the planet, and it marked the first big shift in the dynamics of the Farsight expedition. First, the Firecast's armour changed, seemingly entirely voluntarily, to match the colours of Showva and his fellow commanders, the colours of Arcanartia first worn by Shavastos. Second, perhaps most crucially, the gap between the Ethereals and Farsight was beginning to widen and show even beyond differences in opinion. The four castes gathered together to celebrate and honour the victory on Vior'la, but the Ethereals weren't there with them. This might sound innocuous on its own, but in hindsight and in combination with what else was going on, these events suggest that the gathered Tau were honouring Showva as much as they might the Tau Va. It wasn't a cult of personality, far from it, but it might help to explain what happened later. The Farsight expedition would go on to take the other primary worlds in the subsector, Lubgral, Tinekla, and Salash-Hay, as well as many others. But the task assigned was not yet complete when a huge Orc fleet was sighted belonging to the Warchief of Alsanta, Grog Ironteeth. The expedition would probably have been able to complete the conquest demanded by the Ethereals before needing to deal with the Big L, and the Ethereals on the expedition explicitly did demand this, but Showva did the unthinkable. He said no. The Orcs would be dealt with first. This was the first time ever that we know of that an order from an Ethereal had been directly disobeyed, and somehow, despite their previous warning, there was no immediate exile for Farsight. Regardless of the reasons why the status quo was maintained for the time being, it was, and now Showva was entering into a war that would open his mind and change the Tau Va irrevocably. The initial fleet combat between the Farsight expedition and Warchief Grog went massively in Showva's favour. In combination with Admiral Koro Limao Teng, the Orcs were battered and driven off, with the Tau in hot pursuit. Showva seemed to want the Orcs wiped out despite this victory, perhaps due to Arcanartia, and so the pursuit continued. This Warchief, however, was not like a typical Big L. This one had some smarts to go with the strength, and the remaining Orc fleet split into two. One half travelled to the relic world known as Arthas Moloch, whilst the other travelled to Atari Vo, a world held by the Tau and a populous one at that. Showva followed the Atari Vo bound fleet first, arriving to help bail out the defenders, much to the surprise of said defenders, it must be noted. The planet was saved in the most practical sense, in that Grog was driven off and the Orcs were defeated, but it was nearly cataclysmic for both the world and the High Commander. Grog was able to launch an asteroid storm, probably just chucking all the spare rocks he had to hand, causing huge amounts of devastation, and he had himself some high-tech allies in the form of the legendary freebooter Captain Badrock. This was probably the largest engagement in what is known to the Orcs as the War of Daka, and it culminated in Shova being absolutely humiliated by the Baygel, even if the expedition and the other defenders were able to drive Grog off. The High Commander led his forces in pursuit of an Orc force that was falling back from an aircast intervention, but ended up being ambushed and overwhelmed by the Orcs in turn. Some might see the analogue to Cao Yon in this, were the Baygel smart enough to actually do that, but either way it shook Shova to his core. He was rescued by other forces and evacuated, but took no further part in the war for Atari Vo. And when the war on that world was over, it was shown that Grog had duped Shova again, as many of the previously conquered worlds had now been invaded in turn by the Orcs, including all 4 of the major worlds we already mentioned. Farsight was humiliated again, and he retreated into solitude for a period of time to reflect on things. After a while spent meditating in his custom XV8 at the base of Vior'la's oceans, he returned with a new sense of purpose and a plan. He travelled across the 4 key worlds, starting with the aircast taken home, the crystalline planet Tinekla. There, the aircast pilots were involved in mass dogfights with the ramshackle Orc aircraft, and Shova's intervention saw their vented propellants ignited to incinerate the Baygel, whilst the more graceful Corvetra rolled the thermals to safety. Next came the watery conglomerate known as Salashhe, where vast Orc fleets besieged the home of the Watercast. This time, Shova harnessed similar technology to the seismic fibrillators used on Vior'la against the Imperials to trigger tsunamis, sinking the Baygel warships. A similar trick was utilised on the Earthcast preferred home, the tunnel-laced memorial world of Lubgral. The various spire nodes were mag-lifted by the Corvatra, and the Orcs were wiped out by seismically triggered landslides. And then there was Vior'la, the Firecast explosive home and Shova's base of operations. A series of firestorms were triggered across the planet to scorch the Orcs away along with their spores, with Warchief Grog bested by Shova in combat shortly after. But even with their Warchief dead and the expedition's holdings secured by turning the elements themselves against them, the Orcs still weren't done. Remember that half-fleet that travelled to Arthas Moloch? Still there, and Shova wanted it conquered along with everything else that Grog had taken. And so the expedition landed on the relic world, presumably executing the same tactics that had been working up to then, or variations within them. But things went very wrong and very weird very fast. At a location designated by the Aircast as the Great Star Dace, a warp portal appeared and a demonic host manifested, though the Tau had no idea what this was, since even dealing with the possessed Watercast hadn't given much information to Shova aside from the actual word demon. The Orcs became a non-concern as the Molochites assaulted both races, with the Tau quickly retreating under strict instruction not to look back into the portal from whence they came. But Shova looked back, and he saw into the Immaterium itself. If the experience can drive a Gala mad, what could it do to a member of the Tau Va? As it turned out, it knocked out Shova, causing him to pass out from a mental overload or breakdown of sort, but he did recover enough to continue the assault. His peers requested a withdrawal, but Farsight would not have it. Arthas Moloch was to be cleansed of whatever had happened to it, and so the Tau came back down to the surface. The battle converged back on the Great Star Dace, with Shova dueling with what we would recognise today as a bloodthirster of Khorne. During the running battle, he encountered a weapon, a blade that he took up in desperation, but that seemed to reflect his face through his XV8 back at him. This was the Dawn Blade, a weapon believed to be of Catan or Necrontyr origin, though truly of provenance unknown, and Shova has chosen to retain it throughout the rest of his life, despite Tau not typically fighting in melee. He also discovered medallions with a hexagrammatic shape, something that he had seen in visions during the war for Vior'la against the Gala, and the design of which had been used to banish demon Paul Malchior afterward. And then it went from bad to worse for the Tau. The Ethereals started dying. 2 of the 3 went down in quick succession, all but shattering the Tau morale, and Shovah was forced to converge all troops on his position as an attempt to maintain order. Even with the growing rift between Shovah and the Ethereals and the seeming shift in loyalty, the sway of the Aun can never be underestimated. The final plan saw the hexagrammatic medallions gathered together due to their effects on the demons, whilst XV-18s with flamers attempted to cleanse the Great Star Dace of all blood, whilst no warriors shed any more upon it. Shovah had surmised that the blood powered the Molochites, and he proved to be correct. The medallions were then slung into the portal, or a beam of energy was somehow channeled through them and the Dawnblade to close the warp rift and banish the already weakened demons. Sources seem to conflict on exactly how it was done, as I recall. But the cost was dire, as the third and final Ethereal was slain in the closing phases of the battle, and it was here, at this moment, that the bonds between the Tau Empire and the Farsight expedition were finally, if not fatally, severed. Rather than return to Tau space as had been instructed before his departure, Shovah, along with his forces, remained in their newly conquered territories. These became known eventually as the Farsight Enclaves, a breakaway state bereft of the Aun, yet flourishing anyway. Shovah had come to realise the true threat of chaos and the nature, or unnature one could say, of the universe, and he came to the conclusion that the Aun already knew about it and were choosing to hide it. This, combined with contemplations of the controlling nature of the Ethereals and so much more, broke the now ancient by Tau standards commander, and he unravelled in his mind a heresy powerful enough to topple the Aun and the entire Tau Empire purely from his words. But unlike the Gairon Shah Primarch Horus, this was not corruption by chaos, or at least not to our knowledge, and Farsight chose not to act upon his newfound understanding of events. Instead, he chose a new life, the Hermit's life, a way that he could sit on what he knew without it destroying the Tau Va. Commander Farsight disappeared and vanished into legend, his iconic XV-8 standing in Vior'la bearing the colours of Arcanasha, the new colours of the Farsight Enclaves. The tale of Shovah falls silent for a time as he spends it in solitude and hermitage. For any other Tau, this would likely be the end of the story due to a natural short lifespan. But Farsight is different. Through means unknown to him, he still yet lives. The reason why? The Dawnblade and its chronophagic alloy, which steals the remaining natural lifespan from anyone slain by it and adds it to the life of the wielder. This has allowed Shovah to outlive any Tau not interred in stasis, and if the battlefield does not claim him, he will likely live for an incredibly long time, but should he ever find out why, he may decide to take things into his own hands. However, regardless of his long life's reasoning, it did allow him to walk back out of legend when his adopted home was threatened once again. This threat was the newest arrival to the galaxy, the Yihei believed to be a splinter of High Fleet Kraken. The invasion of Vior'la began to warp the planet, as it always does, causing Shovah to realise his return was necessary, and despite the disbelief of the Tau present on planet at the time, he was able to prove his identity and gain access to his XV-8 as well as overall command. To stabilise the morale of the Tau on world, a mass Talisera was conducted across the entire army by Shovah before they took to the defence of their home. However, the Mon'tyr tactics of the commander proved to be of limited effect against the Great Devourer. Slaying the leader beast was useful, but as on Arcanasha, it was not stopping or thinning the hordes of Tyranids. And so Orvesa, kept alive by a mixture of chemicals of his own design, suggested doing something Shovah had perhaps never done before, attempt to use something along the path of Khao Yon. A new plan was put into action. Vior'la was evacuated of almost all personnel, both military and civilian, with only a handful of Tau left on world. Amongst them was a team of Earth-cast scientists led by Orvesa and a small Firecast detachment of only 8 Herexver pilots. Shovah, Oberlotine 9-0, Shavastos, Bravestorm, a 7th generation clone of Brightsword, a Riptide Shas'O, and 2 newcomers, Shas'O Arachon, overall commander of the Enclaves pre the return of Shovah, and Sub-Commander Torchstar, a defector who had, I believe, brought the XV-104 schematics across to the Enclaves. The XV-104 pilot was killed during the ensuing battle, though Ovesa was able to bring it back online and would eventually create a unique piloting array to let him take up the Herexfreux as an honour chassefreux. These 8, nowadays known as the 8, held the line against the Yihei alone, buying time for Ovesa and the Earthcast to develop some form of countermeasures to the Tyranids before letting the hordes through and evacuating themselves. All the scientists aside from Ovesa were forced to give their lives in order to transmit the countermeasure. When their biomass was absorbed into the hive ships following the harvesting of Vior'la, it spread like wildfire and killed the bioships outright, whilst the Tau watched on. Vior'la was wiped of life, perhaps for a second time, but the Farsight Enclaves were saved and the Tau would recolonize and rebuild the home world anew. Shovah did not make his return a fleeting one and chose to stay with his people following the war for Vior'la rather than return to his solitude. He had again spent his time wisely, reflecting on his discoveries and on the actions of the Ethereals, concluding that the Damocles Crusade had actually been a grand-scale carry-on that would prevent the vast size and power of the Imperium from breaking the Tau morale. However, much as before his self-imposed hermitage, this was not something he widely shared. Despite his break with the Aun, he still believed in the Tau-Va as a concept and wished to see it prosper. As a result, the increased understanding of chaos, the Ethereals and much more has mostly been kept just to Shovah for the sake of the Tau-Va. Further to this desire for prosperity, something you might not have ever expected happened toward the end of the third sphere of expansion within the Empire. Commander Farsight returned, at least for a while. Aun'Va, now Ethereal Supreme following the death of Aun'Wa, had all but erased Shovah from history and silenced his supporters following the commander's disappearance and the creation of the Enclaves, raising the defrosted Shas'O to High Commander at the beginning of the Third Sphere. But in the second Agralan campaign, the battle in which Aun'Va would actually be slain by a member of the Officio Assassinorum, Shovah and the Farsight Enclaves announced their existence and return in a very Shovah-y sort of way, dropping in from the sky as part of a mass battlesuit assault. Shas'O and her own forces on Mugalath Bay were faltering under a massive Imperial invasion, but the arrival of the Enclaves was able to swing the momentum of the battle almost irreversibly. Shas and Sho worked together well during the war, with both aiding the other against the Galar, even if their relationship was certainly strained by their widely divergent paths. The Imperium came to the conclusion that the world could not be retaken in the face of this combined Tau force with the armies on hand, but that did not mean that it would be a repeat of Delith with a negotiated peace. An execution force of the Officio Assassinorum was dispatched to slay Shovah, Shas'O, and Aun'Va. The last was slain by a Culexus, the second somewhat lucky to survive a Kalidas. Both an Eversa and a Vindicare were sent after Farsight, presumably due to the presence of the Eight. The Eversa required the combined effort of the Enclave's legends to be defeated and severely damaged Oblotai 9-0, whilst Cadrel was slain protecting Shovah from the Vindicare, which was later slain by Darkstrider of the Empire. And as if that wasn't enough, the Naval Admiral launched an Exterminatus on Mugalath Bay, whilst the Adeptus Mechanicus set its surrounding space aflame out of spite, though both Shas'O and Shovah were safely away by then. The Ethereals ordered Shadowsun to hunt down and capture Farsight, which she accepted because she hasn't got the memo about saying no yet, but she did warn Shovah about it to give him time to get himself and his surviving forces away from the Ethereals. Presumably with that warning ringing yet duly sort of ignored, Shovah took his forces to the world of Tlas'la to fend off a splinter fleet of High Fleet Leviathan, though I'm not sure how well that particular engagement actually went. He also made a solo journey back to Arthas Moloch, revisiting the worlds where one could argue that the Enclaves were born and his secession was assured. But what he found or learned or did there is a mystery to me, I'm afraid. Most recently, following the creation of the Mon'tyr, Shovah and the Enclaves have fought their battles more closely to home than they'd probably like against a somewhat familiar foe. The Baegel were back. Warlord Nazdreg Ug Erdgrub, yes that one, the co-invader of Piscina IV alongside Ghazghkull Thraka, had heard tale of Grog's War of Daka from a parley with Captain Badrock. Determined to prove his warriors were the shootiest, or at least could outshoot Grog and Badrock's attempt at it, Nazdreg launched his own invasion of the Enclaves with the secondary goal of converting a KX-128 Storm Surge ballistic suit into a Stomper. Sadly, I can't actually tell you how it's going. I'm not going home in the midst of a Baegel invasion because I'm not an idiot, thank you very much. But even with the pedigree of Nazdreg, I somehow fancy Shovah's chances in this one. And there you have it, the story of Shas'O, Vior'la, Shovah, Case Mon'tyr, at least up to now. The story of Commander Farsight is a long and intricate one, with a lot of moving parts behind the scenes that led to his quote-unquote fall in seceding from the Tau Empire. But whatever you think of that decision, no one can deny that he is a legend of the Tau, both before and after his departure. And the Farsight Enclave show that the Tau Va is strong enough to thrive and prosper, even without the guiding hand of the Aun. Seriously, just get rid of them, you Empire idiots. It has been an honour to finally tell this story in my own words, and I hope that I was able to still maintain a measure of neutrality despite my homegrown biases. My guy Vesa tells me that this is some sort of milestone for these logs, the 150th if I check the records, and it will not be the last. Next time? I honestly don't know. We'll see what the galaxy decides to offer up as a tale to tell. For now, thank you for watching Tactica Imperialis. This has been Fior'el / Case Mihal, and I will speak to you again. Goodbye.